Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Acceleration of Digitalization of Clinical Development Post-COVID-19. Before we get started, I just would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate to today's webinar. You will have the opportunity to submit text question to today's presenter by typing your question into the question pane and control panel. You might send in your question at any time during the presentations, and we will collect this and address them at during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Joanna Florek-Marwitz, Head Risk Management and Data Quality at UCB. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessandra. Welcome everyone to this fourth in series of SCDM webinars. All three past webinars of this SCDM related COVID-19 outbreak were outlined to the regulatory guidelines on COVID-19 across the regions. And we had this first one, the very first one on 22nd April on this year. Later on, we had another two webinars in May and June, where we have presented an analysis of the immediate impact of the pandemic during the urgent stage of this pandemic in May and June. So today we have fourth in series, and the topic is related to acceleration of digitalization and clinical development. So let me, so my name is Joanna Florek-Marwitz, like Alexander already mentioned, and I will be your moderator today. So let me set some context for today's topic. The topic, the acceleration of digitalization and in the clinical development. As the COVID-19 situation is now, as we all know, ongoing for many months, so over 6 months already. And the industry is facing continuous challenges. We have observed the accelerated development of regulatory guidance at the very beginning, and later on in parallel also the acceleration of the clinical development programs itself. So, and what we all have realized across the industry, in order to bring new products to market and to address the urgent medical needs of our patients, our strategies have already changed and will continue to develop and change even quicker. So this is an essential to the COVID-19 vaccine trials itself, so that we can have the research results visible for us, in form of a vaccine, but also the COVID-19 impact on other studies, other trials. This become visible, a catalyst to rethink the clinical development process in many points. So on the agenda today, we have several aspects of this acceleration, and this list is by far not complete. So those are examples. And the single most impactful strategy for transforming and accelerating clinical trials is the digitalization and building a digital study end-to-end concept. And this should begin with the trial protocol. So in addition to this, we will share with you the digital protocol platform, how it works, and this in connection with standards and increasing this and resulting in increasing standardization and automations in study builds and also during the study execution, data collection, validation, data sets for submissions. So this acceleration through digitalization and in combination with standardization can have significant amount reduction before the first patient first visit, and later on also as well to shorten the overall clinical trial life cycle, so from the protocol authoring to submission. And there is another so this is the one of the key pillars, and the other is the message of that we need to increase the efficiency of the data validation. And this is where the other presentations of the very innovative machine learning solutions for automating EDC queries will be presented today, and this especially at the study closeout stage, where the artificial intelligence provides the the validation prediction and speed up the assessments of data discrepancies and all follow-up activities. So let's get started. And maybe from the organizational point of view, we have solution providers today. We have also with me today, I have two industry peers, Ralph Russo and Dimitris Tsambas from Pfizer. And we, at the end of the webinar, we will have a round table discussion and interactive Q&A session. So before we move to the solution providing part of the webinar, Ralph or Dimitris, is there anything you would like to add for the start?
Sorry, no, nothing right now. I think we'll cover during slides and then the Q&A as well.
Very good. Thank you. And yeah, this views, everything what we present today are the views and opinions expressed in this, in this presentation, are those of the authors and not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of SCDM. So let's get started with digital data flow and digital protocol. Our first presenters are Maria Perkinson and Barry Nelson from Nuracor. Maria brings more than 20 years experience delivering business and IT transformation solutions. She has really extensive experience in clinical trial operations, management. She's also an expert in applying program management, process improvements, and innovation in combination with change management methodologies. Maria is Vice President, Process and Technology Optimization at Nuracor. Our second presenter is Barry Nelson, Chief Standards Officer at Nuracor. And also Barry has over 20 years industry experience across biostatistics, clinical data management, and data standards. And before founding this company, Nuracor, Barry was leading the standards development for CDISC. Barry has a unique perspective on metadata management and really challenge facing the biopharma industry in the towards the digital data flow way. So Maria and Barry, the stage is yours.
Thank you.
Maria, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you see the agenda, correct?
That's correct.
Fantastic. Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction, and we're delighted to be a part of the SCDM COVID-19 educational series. I'd like to kick off the presentation today talking about, oddly enough, the Swiss Alps and hiking. So I would like to introduce you to an avid hiker and adventurer whom we'll call Sonia, and talk a bit about one of her latest adventures. Let me get my display correct. There we go. Okay. So wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't have some difficulties, correct? Can you still see it?
Yeah, we can see the first mountains.
Okay, great. There we go. So earlier this year, Sonia traveled to a beautiful alpine village where she stayed several weeks and spent several hours hiking through the Alps. Sonia captured much of her trip through digital pictures, entries in her blog, and she also wore the latest and greatest smartwatch. This served not only as her GPS, but also tracked her activity, her elevation. Her watch also monitors her sleep trends, her heart rate. It detects irregular rhythms. It also monitors her blood ox levels. Additionally, in this device, she stores her current medical information, such as medications, allergies, and underlying conditions. Now, unfortunately, upon her return home to the U.S., Sonia realized some symptoms and subsequently tested positive for the coronavirus. This led to hospitalization and participation in a clinical trial to determine the safety and efficacy of a particular drug therapy for the treatment of COVID-19. Now, Sonia's treatment and the test results collected during the trial, along with her medical history, contributed directly to the regulatory submission for approval of the therapy and Sonia's full recovery. So the story does have a good end. Although fictionalized, this is meant to emphasize two key points, one of which is not to advertise the greatest and latest smartwatch, but to really emphasize the importance of digital data, the digital footprints that provide life-saving insights. But most importantly, the message here, and it's not working again. Let's see if I can build this. There we go. Most importantly, the message here is to remind us of why we all work to do what we do, to accelerate clinical development. I don't think any of us have ever expected to witness such a pandemic as we have today, but it is an absolute testament to the need to deliver life-saving therapies to patients faster. So having said that, I'm going to introduce you to Sonia. I'm going to turn it over to Barry, who's going to continue the story and talk about some current challenges and the opportunities and benefits of digital acceleration. So,
great. Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
What we see here is a representation of the clinical development lifecycle, starting at the protocol, running through the database, the functional plans, SDTM standards, ADAM standards, TFLs, etc., resulting in a CSR. So today, the processes are perhaps some of them are, we've got some level of automation in there, but we have a degree of manual intervention at each stage along the way. Next, please, Maria. So what we see here is, we've got some standardization at the process layer and some at the data layer. So often within each individual function, we've got a good degree of automation or efficiency built in. Often when we get to the handover points, we've got somewhat of a barrier and a translation. Next, please. So that can result in what we call data islands or process barriers. And depending on the degree of standardization within a clinical development organization, this can be great or it can be minimized. But I think the simple fact is today we've got a lot of manual effort involved in each of the handovers. Next, please, Maria. So that indicates each of those points has a barrier along the way. So where do we want to end up? Next, please, Maria. So ideally, what we want to do, and this is where a digital platform process provides us the benefits, we want to remove the manual pieces from this as much as possible. So what we have here is a representation where if we hold the use a common digital language, have all of the artifacts, including the protocol and the statistical analysis plan, the functional plans, held in digital form. So rather than documents, Word documents or PDFs, if in digital form, those documents are actually connected up into the clinical development process. So you can, so for example, you can connect objectives and endpoints to specific activities that are required for collection in a clinical trial. Automate the study build, and with the connections within your digital asset repository, connect those to SDTM, ADAM, and get a level of automation right from the very beginning. In digital format, you can ensure that your protocol is consistent with your downstream standards, so you're not having any disconnects down the line and challenges with being able to use the standardization you've put in place. With digital, using this example, we can show that in a COVID study, we're looking at partial oxygen as a parameter for measuring efficacy. So we can, through the connections in your repository, you can automate the collection of the lab data that's required, the specifications required there, as you automate your study build. You can automate the information required for the CRF instructions and data management plans and other functional documents that are required for the study. You can build up the connections that show you how to map the content into, I think that says RE, it should be LB, into the LB domain for SDTM. Consequently, map that through to the ADAM data sets, likewise to TFLs, and this likewise into the clinical study report. In digital form, you can share information across documents. So reusability is obviously an important factor in bringing agility and acceleration into the clinical development process. Being able to share content from the protocol into the SAP and into the CSR ensures consistency, ensures the quality by design approach, so define once and reuse many times. And then you can have an overall governance process, dashboards on the platform that enable you to monitor and view the overall process. So each of the functions becomes a piece in the same puzzle rather than a separate puzzle represented for each function. So taking this approach enables you to trim significant time off some of the cycle times by enabling you to do a number of things in parallel, which are currently done in serial. And Maria will talk about, on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what we call a lean protocol process, which is really driving at that idea. How do you parallelize a number of the processes to start taking them off the critical path and trimming critical cycle times?
Great. Thank you, Barry. Yeah. Can you hear me? Same screen?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks, Barry. So I want to talk just briefly about the holistic approach to digital transformation. So digital transformation marks a radical rethinking of how organizations use technology, people, and processes, and fundamentally change our ways of working. We need to unlearn past practices and really take a holistic approach to these new ways of working to maximize and quantify the value. So technology and automation alone cannot achieve the full benefits and cost savings. The full product, process, people framework needs to be considered and approached holistically to really break down functional barriers, break the document paradigm, and focus on critical data and the activities by streamline organizations, governance, as well as operating models. So as Barry mentioned, to put this into practice, I'm going to talk about the main protocol process. So this process exemplifies how a single source of the truth, let's go back, how a single source of the truth can drive digital elements through the development lifecycle in the context of clinical operations. Although this slide really reflects a very small representative example, it reflects some of the efficiencies of a protocol as a digital asset, whereby the development is informed by data standards and the downstream automation is driven by the integrated protocol and standards content within the clinical trial lifecycle, as you can see across the top, from planning through to setup, execution, and closeout, just to set the framework for the process. So as you also see across the top row, this is based on what we call protocol stability levels, where from the CDP to the first draft protocol, or what we call protocol level 1, information on study design and planning, things such as objectives and endpoints, arms, inclusion/exclusion criteria, sample sizes, proposed populations, this becomes available early on and triggers the downstream activities and processes. As you can see here, feasibility planning can begin, as can development of functional plans, including the statistical analysis plan. Further down, driving study build, particularly with the statistical analysis plan being developed in parallel with the protocol, as it identifies what's to be analyzed. Once you know what is to be analyzed, then you know what data needs to be collected. So these digital assets further drive the development, also the other functional plans for things like data management, for monitoring, for medical reviews, etc., as well as other system builds for data collection, IXRS, trial supply management, etc. So as the protocol further evolves and moves to level 2, the digitized schedule of activities becomes available. The processes and activities such as study build are further accelerated, as this data does a full round trip back to the repository, providing collection, analysis, and submission specifications. The technology further accelerates activities through what we call a gated process, wherein sections of the protocol can be released for downstream reviews and use, triggering the respective and relevant workflows to support process execution. This also enables a feedback loop for the protocol. So feedback and changes can be made, the protocol can be updated long before final protocol. As the same functionality, along with robust versioning capability, provides the ability to amend relevant sections of the protocol. Coupled with interoperability in other systems, it streamlines and accelerates any changes needed during the study execution as well, particularly those that are driven by protocol amendments. So this intelligent automation drives not only quality and consistency, but it most importantly drives the behaviors that focus on critical data versus the completeness and accuracy of every data point and at the expense of the critical aspects. Quite simply put, the power of an MDR is unlocked within a platform that enables digitization of critical, common, and reusable components. Coupled with this lean process, can shave at least 8 months off of the life cycle, significantly contributing to our common goal to accelerate the delivery of life-saving therapies to patients. So just a brief touch on innovation. Obviously, that's the trend. That's where we need to go. We need to set the foundation for the clinical trials of the future. So a digital platform is a critical catalyst to the acceleration, driving main processes through quality by design, driving behaviors that focus on critical data while providing the foundation for further information. And that's what we'll see presented by Sama in our next segment of the session. So just to close, I want to really just recap and hit on the critical components, the necessities to really fully realize the benefits of standards. Automation of downstream processes, reusable and repeatable assets, driven by a single source of the truth for the digital assets, traceability and data lineage, regulatory compliance, very critical, the automated propagation of changes and amendments throughout the process, faster studies, shortened timelines, and most importantly, reduced time to market and therapy to patients. So on that note, I believe I'll turn it over to our colleagues at Sama. Is that right, Joanna?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will thank you, Maria and Barry. I first of all would like to introduce our next presenters. Thanks. Right, so our next presenters are Sagar Anishi-Garayu and Malaikanan Sangarasubu, and both are working for Zama Technologies or representing Zama Technologies today. Sagar is Chief Strategy Officer, is also named this year Pharma Voice 100 list of the most inspiring individuals in life sciences. Sagar guides the concepts, design, and development of innovative data and analytics solutions at Zama, and leads Zama's transformation journey, creating focus areas, business models, and repeatable offerings. And our second presenter is Malaikanan Sankarasubu, Vice President and of Artificial Intelligence research at Zama Technologies. Previous to this company, he was founder and CTO of Natural Language Understanding startup, and has also authored multiple peer-reviewed scientific papers that has been published at major conferences. Malai strongly believes that artificial intelligence would play a major role in optimizing and accelerating clinical trials. And I think we all share this opinion with you. So the stage is yours, Sagar.
Thanks, Joanna. For setting a specific example that we're going to share more details, what I thought was I would give you a little bit of a broad areas of where, as you digitize the clinical data, you need to kind of digitize the insights that you can get from those digital data. And then how do you accelerate that part is what I wanted to kind of set the context a little bit. As we see about insights, we kind of broadly categorize them into three distinct areas where we see kind of a innovative artificial intelligence play that is possible today, right? I call them connect, context, and converse. Let me build this up. In the connect, where we are actually seeing as we digitize the challenges that pharma seems to be facing across the spectrum is being kind of unable to quickly connect to the data assets that are required. And then more importantly, map them to the internal standards, external standards that Barry mentioned about SDTM, ADAM, etc. How do we standardize them? How do you map them? How do I quickly get to my data so that I can start doing my analysis, etc.? Seems to be a big kind of error-prone, manual, and non-repeatable with the traditional rule-based systems, right? So this is one area where we're seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of advances where artificial intelligence with deep learning and machine learning models being able to learn the patterns and to substantially accelerate that work. So something which used to take maybe hours, days, months, we're actually seeing them happening in minutes, right? So that's kind of the connect area is again a very exciting area where transformative changes are happening with artificial intelligence within clinical trials. Second area is what we call context. So this is where it's all about in a given in a day for a given persona at my moment, what is those one or two things that are most relevant for me contextually, and then so that I can take a specific outcome, derive a specific outcome from that, right? Not throwing some hundreds of dashboards and reports at you and then ask you to analyze, but can you actually contextually figure out what is the most relevant thing in your workflow, and then give you an outcome from that. I mean, the smart data query, which we're going to explain later, is a great example of this contextualization of clinical data managers' work within using AI to accelerate that work. Third area is what we call converts. It's all about do I need complex programming help to kind of convert or understand my data assets and my insights, or can I actually convert like in a consumer world, I'm able to converse with my Alexas or whatever. Can I make a complex conversational ability with my insights, because everything is digitized, right? The first generation virtual assistants were okay, but now we are seeing a lot of advances happening. The virtual assistants becoming completely clinical aware, domain aware, so that very meaningful insights can be converted. So connect, context, and converse are three broad areas where we see kind of, I want you to think of how to use AI in the entire journey, clinical journey. Of course, within those three areas, there are several specific examples. Within the connect, how do we quickly onboard the data sets? How do we map them? It's not only just my internal data, I also have external data from industry, ecosystem. How do you map them? How do you later on use them to submit, whether it's an ADAM, LTNG, or whatever submission standards that FDA and other regulatory agencies require. So all this come in the connect area, right? In the context, some examples are smart data query, wherein we can learn and transform the operations and workflows of clinical data managers, or maybe give some predictive modeling. And then the conversational aspect, it's about how do we actually completely transform the way we've been consuming information using dashboards, and can we actually make it a conversation? So these are different examples of where AI is making fundamental changes, transformative changes. In some places it is augmenting, and in some places it's transforming, but still keeping the human in the loop to make these transformation changes. With that said, my colleague Malai will give us, walk us through a specific example of a smart data query, and then how that transforms the system. Over to you, Malai. Trifin, if you can give Malai control.
You have no control, Malay.
Malai,
We can hear you.
We can hear now.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I was talking on mute. Two controls. Okay. So thanks for that introduction, Sagar. So what I'm gonna address today is like smart data query, right? So typically, like this is something that we're seeing like in the data manager. So this particular use case is targeted more towards the data management side of things during the clinical trial process. Okay. The flow is like site investigator, they submit this case report forms to EDC, right? The data gets pulled from the EDC through current processes, reports, and like a lot of other systems, right? You pull reports out and other things and manually review a lot of these data points and try to figure out what is discrepant in that, right? And maybe if you find something discrepant, like you're trying to write a query back to the site saying that, hey, we found an issue with the data that you entered, and maybe you want to go and fix it, right? It's literally looking for a needle in the haystack. I mean, experienced data managers are really good in doing it, right? And they know, they have a sense of data and everything. But is there a way to actually get them to do this process better and faster, right? I think that's where we were driving towards smart data query. It's a machine learning enabled, to be very specific, it's a deep learning model that runs underneath to actually help to determine whether a data point is discrepant or not. Okay. If you look at it, this is the way the process works, right? Like, we pull the data from EDC, okay, and like, we do a prediction, and then like, the prediction. If you look at one key aspect of it, is data manager is actually like, the front and center of everything. Like, it's a human in the middle, right? So there is a reason for it. Like, we always look at the system as a recommendation system, so that, like, you put human in the middle, so that they could actually give an upvote or downvote, give feedback to the system, so the system can learn, and also, like, someone to review the process, right, before you actually send something back to a site. Okay. So the functionality of a smart data query, if you look at it, right, it's actually predict discrepancies at the data point level in a case report form, and explain why the discrepancy is, what is the reason you're saying that particular data point is discrepant, and then, like, try to generate a query text also for it as part of that. So some of these forms that we are going after, like, it's a Pareto's principle, right? Like, we wanted to focus on the ones that has high impact, right? So we went after adverse event, CONMED, dosing, vital signs labs, and a few of these forms. Okay. The main key aspect is, like, it's cross-panel discrepancies are predicted, and actually there's a UI which I'll probably show at the end, to actually for data managers to review, right? So it's machine learning is one side of things, like, which brings it predicts whether a data point is discriminant or not. Then the next step is actually bringing it on top of an UI, like, which is highly usable, so the data managers can review, make those decisions right then and there. And if they find something, if they agree with the model's prediction, they click on approve and upvote, thumbs up, right? If they don't agree on it, thumbs down, and if they agree on it, then send it to EDC. So that's the way it works. Okay. So the main this thing is, like, there's a lot of questions typically which I get asked is, like, even from the executive management and SAMA, is like, why machine learning for this particular use case, right? So the reason why this needs machine learning in this is the number of data points is a lot, right? And the kind of scenarios that you have to really write. So the way I would explain why machine learning in this case is, there are too many rules to be programmed in case of edit checks and other things to solve this problem very effectively, right? So I mean, like, one scenario, yes, you can. The number of permutation combinations is so much, right? Like, it becomes unmanageable at some point. It takes a lot of time from a study setup and stuff. So this was actually a right problem for us to go after from a machine learning perspective. So ideally, what it really does is it learns on the historical data. There are teach cycles, right, in which the ground truth data is given, which is used by the model to actually learn the pattern, right? And the pattern that it learns, it uses from the past data that it's learned, right? It tries to project that onto a new data that it sees, and if it finds that it's close enough, right, then it may raise a discrepancy on that. Okay, and there's a human in the loop feedback for evaluating predictions, and there is a slot filling approach for query text generation. And all this model inference, like training and all these things, run on a GPU based infrastructure, since a lot of these underneath are linear algebra operations, right? So one part is, like, that, right? The second part is definitely that we are, like, getting into the clinical inference areas of data management side of things too. So what it really means is, right, like, for example, there are scenarios where you the high value ones are, like, saying, hey, is this medication even a logical for this particular AE term, right? How do we go and find that out, right? So historically, like, what we have done is we have crawled PubMed and other things, and we have trained our natural language processing models on top, using which, right, along with other open data, like, open FDA and other things, right? So we have extracted for a medication, like for a drug name, right? Like, we know what are the possible indications, what are the approved list of indications from it. We have extracted that, and using that, we actually, like, cross-check along with Wood Drug Dictionary and as well as Medra to make sure that it is actually an approved list of indication, okay, or approved list of use for this particular medication. These kinds of, I mean, like, whenever you have to go after text and other things, the rules for you to write some of these to solve in a traditional programming way become extremely complicated. So that's the reason for machine learning in this case. Okay. So now I want to get into a little bit of detail on what is a teach cycle, right? Machine learning is not a magic dust, right? Like say that throw at it, it's going to find all these crazy patterns and come out. No, when you have to teach the model, you have to literally teach it like a baby for it to understand, right? For it to learn what that pattern really is, okay? And you have to also control what it really learns, right? So that way, it's easier. We have some sense of control on why it's making some decisions and what it really sees and saw and what it didn't see, right? So the way it works is, right, you typically, what happens is from historical data, we have created this ground truth, tagged data, annotated data. Not all data are the same, okay? It's annotated data or tagged data, which you give to a model or a machine learning algorithm for it to learn, right? So you create the ground truth, right? And then you develop a model. So this is a training phase, right? In the training phase, what really happens is this is where we use the GPUs heavily for compute for it to learn. Okay, the learning part is done. Then what we do is we generate an output. We don't use every ground truth for training. What we typically do is we do a 70-30 split. 70% is used for model training and 30% is used for actually validating whether the model has learned it properly, right? And then we share that result with the data managers, who actually uses the system to see hey, is this even accurate or not, right? They're in an UAT environment setup, right? They if they see the prediction is accurate, right, they give a thumbs up. If they don't think the prediction is accurate, they give a thumbs down. And the subcategory of the model changes, right? They could actually give feedback right here by toggling and changing the subcategory and everything. And then once that feedback comes in, again we go through the model retraining phase. Some cases, not all subcategories could be solved. We may even in fact end up adding more subcategories or splitting it or dropping it. It depends, right? So that is what typically a teach cycle in this cases. Okay, so okay, so how do we design distributed subcategories, right? I think that is one. These are cross panel, we are checking on adverse event and concomitant medication. Okay, all these are different models that run underneath for you to actually extract. Some of these are similarity models. Some of these are natural language processing based feature extraction that we do. But how do we really design the subcategories, right? In this case, if you look at adverse event and concomitant medication, so adverse event indicates concomitant medication taken. Is there a CM corresponding to stop dates with an AE? Is there a CM record consistent with the record of the treatment of AE? There are quite a few things that typically a data manager would look at before they raise a query to a site in EDC, right? Typically, this process is what we try to. So this becomes one subcategory for us, right? And that is what. And there is a query text that is linked to it, which is given as a template for slot filling for the model to fill in. But this is pretty much how we design a subcategory, right? So this is what is mimicked underneath from a model perspective. So this is trained by data managers to actually help us from designing on what subcategories to put in and what subcategories not to. Okay, so we meant for a really high value ones if you look at it, right? The same thing with concomitant medication and AE, right? It's a reverse of it, but yeah, pretty much the same. Okay, so the next step is how do we even train this machine with ground truth, right? When I call ground truth, it's nothing but label data. Okay, think of it the answer that you want. It's typically what kind of question a model can answer, right? I mean, if you can frame your question well, that's pretty much how you define your business value for something, right? If you can frame your question well, then you can get the right kind of answer from the model, right? And that is what you're making the model to learn, right? For it to learn, you're feeding that answer, saying that, hey, for this question, this is the answer. For this question, this is the answer, right? When some question of similar nature comes in the future, it knows exactly what answer it is, right? That's the way it goes about things. It generalizes that pattern. So endorse subcategories or approved list of subcategories from data managers are given from a model training perspective. And the data managers do tag. We do go for a ground truth expansion, where we look at the query text that has been raised and use that also train a model on top of that to actually expand and get it validated from data managers and use that also for ground truth. We do a subject matter review, okay, with data managers, tagging queries with subcategories. This is the manual part, right? Once you have that, if you have good historical data, typically you don't have to do it. But sometimes, right, you will end up doing it for some subcategories. Then what we do is we apply, so it's a combination of all three, right? That is what it goes into as ground truth example. This is the key from a model training perspective. This is the not so sexy part that is actually more important from a model training perspective that we have spent a good chunk of time on, and that actually, like, has improved an accuracy tremendously. So this entire process, like, is put with the human in the middle, right? It does not automatically push anything to EDC. It always goes through, like, a data manager to review, right? And there are confidence intervals and other things using which they can filter and get to the right kind of a query to review and stuff, right? So it's a simple two-step process from a review perspective, right? Was this, like, let me walk this from this way, right? It's a cycle. Was this data is indeed a discrepancy? If it is yes, like, just leave it as is, right? From a prediction perspective. If it is no, you toggle it, it becomes red. Okay. Was this right kind of data discrepancy? What it really means is, right, I've said at a data point that this data point is discrepant. Okay. But now I need to say why that data point is discrepant, like, what I really mean by that, right? So that is what is in this case subcategory. Okay. And is that a right kind of subcategory, like, now that the model has predicted? I mean, I would have said an yes, but I could have predicted a wrong subcategory. So we give an option for data manager to go change it. Okay. And then, right, like, let's say this is also accurate, but data manager wants to actually change the query text of it. Like, we give them an option to click on the query text and edit the text that is there and save it. All this is all, like, not saved. Any changes that someone makes, it's all saved as an audit, so that, like, we can go back and look at it, who did what. Okay. And then once you do this side of things, right, then you have to save that, right? You have given the feedback to the model, right? The other part of the feedback that you really do is, like, whether you want to approve it, right? Like, moment you approve, it goes to EDC, right? You can reject it, right? When you reject, you can give a reason, different kind of reasons, right? Hey, like, the query is raised in inform, the records are stored in prediction history, whatnot, and all those things, right? Or, like, you can say, what, I want to look at it a little later. I want to put this particular thing on hold. There are workflow options even for that. So that's the way this particular system works. So it's so we use the previous historical data to train the model. Okay, then we get it reviewed from a data manager to make sure that it's all accurate. They help us define the ground truth and everything, right? Then we give the model output to them to validate, right? Then even when we have put it in production, right, they still review before it actually goes to EDC. So it's all human in the middle, and it definitely saves a lot of time from an automation perspective. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Malay, for sharing those ideas. And now we will be moving to the part, on experience-related stuff to COVID-19 situation and some examples from the studies at Pfizer. So Ralph and Dimitris, could you please also introduce yourself as you both past, you are past chairs of the board of SCDM. So I think that, would be good that you guide us through the experience.
Okay, can you see my screen? And if so, what can you see?
Yes, yeah, we can see this. But now
Okay.
not the slides.
Okay, so what about here?
That's better, thank you.
Okay, then let me put this in presentation mode. I have two screens, that's why I was asking. So good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm just going to share the experience Pfizer had and share some of the intersection between the technology that Barry, Maria, and the SAMA folks have just presented to you, and how we use them and where we could improve. So this is who I am. I've been at Pfizer about 2.5 years. I've been in industry, both in the labs and in clinical data management, about 32 years. Coming from Merck, working with Inform, DMW, and bringing that expertise and building a team here at Pfizer as they brought data management back into the business. So again, these views are not SCDMs or not Pfizer either. So I'm going to talk about our study startup process and in particular EDC build, some of the efficiencies we gained from technology, some of it we gained from just hard work, and also speak to a little bit about study database support, our role in making sure this COVID study is always working and running, and collecting data and flowing data, and talk a little bit about the conduct efficiencies and around use of artificial intelligence as Sama just described. So what do we do? Well, we at Pfizer, obviously it was a very urgent mission for the world to come up with a vaccine for COVID-19. And our CEO is very clear that we needed to do this very quickly and get it out there with high quality. So all of the resources, all of the groups at Pfizer are aligned completely and dedicated to this study. It's really a large number of people across both the clinical space, the digital or IT space, the clinical data management space, study management, et cetera, to make the COVID study successful. In startup, we developed everything in parallel. So in the paradigm that Barry and Maria described, Pfizer's not there yet completely. We do have standards that are matched. So when you talk about building a form, you already have your SDTM maps and all those things in place. What we don't have is that linked digital protocol. That certainly would be an efficiency. But with our modular approach and how we store and develop our standards, it really did give us that edge using those technologies we have. So we were able to build the case report form on all the other database specifications in parallel with the protocol, such that when first subject first visit came, it was only 5 days after protocol approval, which is, as you can imagine, a record in any book, as far as I'm concerned. Our typical cycle times here at Pfizer are far greater than that. Though we could do better on a day-to-day basis, 5 days is extremely quick. So how do we do it? Well, again, like I said, the CEO and the rest of the company and the rest of the world, there's a common sense of urgency around getting a vaccine for COVID-19. So that human spirit was a big driver. Technology was a big enabler. Part of the reason why we could do things so quickly is that we agreed that we would make decisions about the case report form, about what we collect, how we collect it early, right, and with finality. So if there were areas that were up for grabs, maybe we're waiting for regulatory feedback, we would shy away from really focusing on that, focusing on what we did know so we could build in parallel those pieces, waiting for the other pieces to resolve themselves with finality. Quality and compliance was always at the forefront. We have our standard processes, which are sort of stage-gated in terms of specifications being signed before we program and before we test and release our database. Those standards were never compromised. With our robust standards, we basically have a pull and use type philosophy in our standards in our study development. We try to minimize customization. We identified any standards needs that didn't exist. So if there was a new item or a new field that needed to be created, those were identified early so that process of building that standard could happen in parallel with the study build activities. And again, we saved those areas that can change or are still a little bit unclear. As you know, it's research, right? With any protocol development, there are some unanswered questions around the science, especially in an area where with the COVID-19 vaccine, we're using new technology in vaccines as well, so messenger RNA-based vaccines. The other contributing factor, which I can't go unnoticed, a lot of people met a lot and just put a lot of hours in. So everyone went the extra mile, working hundreds of hours over the course of the study development, and sometimes 100 hours a week, to make sure that this study was delivered with high quality and with speed never seen before at Pfizer. So now the database is live. Well, what's next? Well, the current challenge is to make sure that we, with a study this large, with a commitment for speed, to keep data flowing and keep queries flowing. So we have quite the substantial data management, study management apparatus in place. But in addition, we're using technology. So looking at smart data query, how can we facilitate query resolution using artificial intelligence and other means? So again, in study conduct, it's still the same human spirit. We have a common sense of urgency and purpose to deliver the data and hope that this vaccine can get approved. We don't know what the data is going to tell us yet. Hopefully we'll find that out soon. But we use automations in many places. Even in startup, we have bots that are in place to create some specifications. We have automations in reports in the conduct phase, etc. Communication with the clinical sites. There are a large number, a handful of sites, not a huge number of sites, but a lot of the sites have a significant number of patients. So the data, as you can imagine, with 44,000 patients, 41 visits, 3 external data sources, and 31 individual unique CRFs, a lot of data coming in fast and furious and has to be kept current at all times. Our goal being to get this submission, obviously, as soon as possible. So study conduct and execution, in many ways, is all about planning. Lots of planning and more planning, and replanning when things change, right? So, this study is somewhat of an adaptive design. We have to amend the protocol periodically, go through that startup cycle again using the same technologies and automations where we can, and speed that so that we don't miss a beat in terms of when the patients are coming in under that amendment. So it's been really, I can honestly say, a privilege to be a part of it. I think everyone at Pfizer is proud that we could achieve these goals and continue every day to help get this vaccine as quickly and safely as possible out to the population. So with that, I will turn it over to the SCDM folks.
Okay, Joanna, would you like to give you control of the slides? Joanna?
Hi, can you hear me? There is something with the audio connection.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
would you like?
All right.
Yeah, we can
okay.
hear you.
Yes, we don't have any slides. We this were those slides we have prepared all together. So now we would like to move to the roundtable discussion and to answering the questions.
Okay, I'll leave the floor to you then.
Thank you. So first of all, we have one question. Can I get more clarity on how to digitalize clinical trial protocol? Are we looking for unified protocol? We already adaptive trial protocol. We have already adaptive trial protocol, which shortens the entire process significantly. So who is going to take this one?
I can take a stab at that first. So I think a digitized clinical development process is looking at digitizing all artifacts within the life cycle, and building those connections between the planning stage, the protocol, through to the execution stage, the specifications of the data that you need to collect. So if you're storing all of those relationships in your repository, that's how you can start significantly trimming down the cycle times of some of the processes, setting up the clinical database, etc. So this is completely complementary to an adaptive trial design approach, where you're looking at bringing agility into your program, ensuring that you have your all of your elements set up to be able to execute, result in an operationally executable protocol, is a key component of the approach to a digitized clinical protocol. So I think we're looking at being able to eliminate hopefully unnecessary protocol amendments. I think there's still a high number. I think Ken Getz at Tufts has metrics on this. I've seen presentations where a third of protocol amendments are currently deemed unnecessary. So if we've got your repository with well-defined content connected all the way through, you can avoid some of those unnecessary protocol amendments. So I see this as completely complementary to the approaches to adaptive trial protocols, and really an enabler to seamless execution.
Thank you, Barry. Another question. This is good proof of concept on data management. However, I feel it would cover some part of DM, but we need data manager to perform holistic review of the data. Is this a question, Dimitris, maybe you could take on?
Sure. Well, I think it's related. I saw another question around, do we still need data review plans? And I think the two are very related. First of all, this is not intended to replace data management. It's intended to complement. It's a tool for data management. So I think that's the first most critical point. So yes, we still need data review plans. There are much more holistic reviews of the data that have to still occur. And even for the checks that smart data query is empowered to make, there's still a human in the loop process. So it is recommending a query that a human needs to accept as logical and to release to the site. So it is only there to complement the process. It is not there to in any way completely, although we think it's a disruptive technology, it's not there to disrupt the process. So still have data review plans, still have human in the loops, and still have data review plans that specify exactly what the human is doing with the information it's providing. And keep in mind, even as we proceed, and as I think Malai gave an example of the child learning, at some point, maybe we'll all agree it's good enough to graduate university, but it's still not going to be doing everything. It's going to be good enough to graduate university for a specific thing. We're a long way from the Terminator, shall we say. I don't know, Sagar, if you want to add anything.
No, I think Dimitris, you're spot on. This is still a productivity tool. It's exciting that there's one aspect of what data managers are doing is getting accelerated, but still we're a long way that that whole process can be eliminated. I don't see it that way, right? But it'll add substantial efficiency gain.
And keep in mind, beyond data review, design of data capture methods and technologies, third-party data acquisitions, mapping. There are so many other aspects of the data management and now evolving, let's say, data scientist profile. That here we're talking about simply review of data integrity.
Right.
Thank you both. And I think this is partially also related to the next question. With your artificial intelligence process in place, do we need a data validation plan at all? Or will this change radically? Can we stop programming edit checks in EDC? And I think you partially gave also the answer, but maybe someone would like to add something.
Well, the edit check piece, I think, is we said the answer. We still need a plan, right? We absolutely, maybe even more so than before. But the edit check, I'll be really cautious. If you can predict, if you look at your edit checks and your standards, depending on where you work, you're going to find that some fire very regularly and some fire very randomly or rarely. And you're going to have to make some logical choices of the ones that are dependable and fire consistently, and they're responded to consistently with the data change or confirmation. And hopefully, you're not just looking to confirm, but you're only firing edit checks for things that sound like they need correcting. But at the end of the day, if you put yourself in a site coordinator's shoes, and they're sitting in front of their computer entering data, you want to surface those edit checks then and there. That you can. You don't want to wait till the next day to send them back the checks and the queries, and then they have to go get the file back and find out what they were doing and give you a response. So I would still say, if you can define the logic, and it's very predictable, and it's focused on the EDC data and not a reconciliation with any other data source, then you are still better off programming it in your EDC. But remember, those are the predictable, straightforward ones. I know, Ralph, Sagar, you guys
No, I think, Demetrius, I'll just add on the intelligent mix and match of this rule-based edit text and learning-based AI models. The combination of that and knowing when to where what works comes through some experience. I think that combination is what will be the real kind of gains. I don't think one will completely replace the other kind of a thing. It will be a mix and match. That's what I think. Ralph, Malai, you want to add anything else?
Well, I could add, I would love to be able to not have to program all the edit checks. And to Dimitri's point, a lot of our edit checks, I want to say about 80%, really, I guess the way, again, data management starts with the design of the case report form to allow high quality data entry. So in that regard, I've seen data that indicates that sites do enter data with high quality, and that a lot of the rules that we write don't ever fire. But to the point of rather than having the site frustrated by having to go back to their records 5, 6, 8, 10 days later, do it right there on the spot. It just makes.
Thank you very much for the answers. Next question is to Barry. I would assume how we can use the Lean protocol to reduce the protocol complexity.
A great question. So I'm not sure we necessarily remove all of the complexity. I think clinical trials are becoming complex because of the types of data that we're collecting, the use of wearables, the use of real world evidence. I think what a digitized protocol can do, it shifts responsibility for managing standards up front, and I would argue that data management, stat programming, need to be involved early in the protocol development cycle to ensure that you're bringing in the considerations for the data that needs to be collected very early on. I think one of the advantages of a protocol is the ability to connect your objectives and endpoints through to the activities that are required for data collection. So you can explicitly ensure that the data you're collecting is actually supporting an endpoint. You're not collecting any unnecessary data. I think once you have control of study level, you can start thinking program level. So you can have an active feedback loop in looking at how you define your inclusion-exclusion criteria, ensure that they're consistent across the program, ensure that your endpoints are defined consistently. So you can get support in defining your program rather than the individual protocol as well. So I think the complexity aspect is managed by automating as much of the mundane, the day-to-day activities, and allowing experienced staff to focus on the real study-specific value-added components of each clinical trial.
Thank you, Barry. We have one comment. I'm always a firm believer of standards and do pull and use method with minimal modifications. This is one great way to reduce cycle time, and following this one is also think of making therapeutic area-based standards forms. And this is less a question, more a statement, but I think it would be worth to hear your opinion to this. So what do you think about the therapeutic area-based standards forms?
So I'll start. So yeah, I agree. We do have therapy-based standards, right? So we, I think like many companies, we identify core, those things that are always going to be in studies, adverse events, CONMED, death forms, things like that. And then very therapy specific, especially in oncology, where such a, we say therapy specific, but it's really indication specific, sometimes those standards. So we do support that. And although the pull and use does give us great efficiencies here, with the digital program, being able to link those endpoints to assessments and then to case report forms and SDTM maps, that's the ideal state. And we're working towards that. And I think if we had those links in place, I think that maybe we still would have delivered 5 days after the protocol is approved, but I think we would have spent a whole lot of hours and overtime doing that. I think it would have been so much easier. So there's efficiencies as well. Right?
I would warn one point on that. I mean, I absolutely agree with the statement, but you got to be cautious not to standardize yourself out of flexibility. because the more you standardize everything, then the more when you touch or break something in the chain, you disrupt everything downstream of that chain. So it is an R&D setting. And if you had a standard that never had to change, I could argue you wouldn't be doing very innovative R&D. So you need to balance the standard with the ability to flex and change when needed. And a standardized way to, and I'm sure our NeuroCore friends probably can speak to this in volumes, to understand what you're impacting downstream through your metadata when you make a standards change. Because that'll get you to applying that standard with the right, not only on the C- components, but every other impacted component downstream.
I agree, Demetrius. And it's important to really put the right governance in place to support your use of standards, right? From the global all the way down to the study level, particularly where I think you really know the pain is to get it off the critical path. When we're accelerating the studies, we're going fast and furious, building at the study level. Make sure that the processes and the governance flows are such that you do not impact that critical path, but you can still manage those standards and keep them consistent going through. Yeah, great point.
Thank you all. Next question is to Malai. Can ML and AI replace the edit checks in a trial for detecting abnormal values, patterns, trends, etc., as it consumes significant amount of time to develop and test before we move to production? You are on mute, I think, Malai. Could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think it's a matter of, I think we need an AI for this, right? To tell when you're on mute. Okay. So, yeah, so it's a matter of defining the right kind of subcategory and having the ground truth data that is available for you to do this kind of activity. I think if you do, right, and there are approaches on how to actually do this. And you can even detect things like, for example, somebody entered a different value for a weight and something else did later, and they're really abnormal. That cannot happen. When those kind of things also can pop up. Okay, the velocity of change could be measured, and a lot of things could be done, right? We do understand the pain point of writing these edit checks and on what it really takes and stuff. Some of these edit checks have to remain, right? Not everything could be replaced. I think it's more of a safety net. But a lot of other things could be handled by SDQ. So both are going to exist parallelly or going to complement each other for at least some period of time. That's the way we are looking at it.
Thank you. And I think the next one is also related to this. Can SDQ errors rectifiable by end users considering the study criticality and scientific assumptions?
Can you repeat the question again?
Can SDQ errors rectifiable by end users consider? I think the question is about if SDQ errors can be end users focused, and how is this really practicable done in the study?
Can SDQ errors
be rectifiable? I guess the answer is if SDQ itself is giving a wrong insight, can end users see it? I mean, I would say absolutely. When the way it has been implemented is always the human always takes control. There's also a thumbs up or a thumbs down mechanism. There's any insight or accuracy levels generated. If that is the data managers who are experienced do not appreciate it or like it or think it is wrong, they can actually give active feedback to the model to get retrained.
Yeah, and there's actually a feature that helps the end users by giving it to the scale of like a confidence level. So absolutely. I mean, every single one is reviewed by a user anyway, but by reviewing some of those and giving the tool the feedback that it was a good or a bad prediction, it helps that accuracy improve over time. So the human there, the human rectifying the mistakes is actually a critical part of the process.
Thank you. The next one is very interesting. Any thoughts on how the database build would look like in 5 years down the line with all the advancements happening on technology front? So it's basically for everyone who would like to start.
That's a pretty loaded question. At least I'll go first with my perspective. In a technology world, folks, it's almost impossible to predict what can happen 5 years later. Things are changing exponentially year over year. In fact, some of the things that we're actually experiencing today, 3 years back, we couldn't have some of these things. So I would actually go and predict that there'll be substantial changes, but in terms of it from technology perspective, but more importantly, the adoption of technology and change management, training, repurposing some of the people's integrations, those are larger issues than technology itself. Purely from technology perspective, I would think that there'll be substantial gains, but how much of that will be adapted and changed is an industry question.
So go ahead, Dimitris.
No, please, go ahead.
I just add to that. I think we have to think about the technology, process, people framework holistically. So I think there's going to be a paradigm shift in the way that we actually run clinical development that will take advantage of the technologies that we have today, but rethink the way that we're using the technology and the way that the process is actually run today. So I agree with Sagar. We don't know what technological advances will be available in 5 years, but I think what's available today, we can certainly start rethinking holistically the way we actually run our clinical trials. And I think COVID is actually identifying the need for that, the agility, velocity, acceleration aspect, and quality by design. I think digitization brings a quality by design, enables you to think up front, link all of your pieces together, and not have to be thinking midstream about how you're, what you've defined you're collecting, how you're going to analyze that, or whatever it may be.
I agree with you there.
There was a piece there. Yeah. There was a piece there about actual design elements that I think we can come back to as a broader topic, in the sense of design elements that maybe we avoided before that we're embracing now. But on the specific database build point, I wanted to give. I think a lot's going to change. I don't have a crystal ball to say what, but I do think a lot is going to change. And I'll give you an example from 15 years ago that Ralph and I worked on at Sharing Plow, where we got together data management, database build, and medical writing and standards, and sat down and said, what are all the most common standards we use in the studies? Why are we calling them 10 different things? If height is height, why does one protocol call it distance from the surface of the earth and another protocol calls it height? So we aligned on nomenclature, and medical writing committed to never modifying that nomenclature for those specific assays and procedures. We connected those to our standards, and then we had some really good SQL programmers that are still out there, and they know who they are, so I won't mention them, that were able to then, just based on a table from the protocol, the time events, we're able to pull every standard and kind of give you the initial creation of a study build. 15 years ago, because of the metadata in the repository and a lot of other things that we have today, we're barely scratching the surface, right? But with SQL and Excel and some good standards, the organization was able to dramatically accelerate our database builds. I think if we sit down and really align on what matters and doesn't matter to change in studies, the opportunities are quite significant.
I agree, Dimitris. Critical focus on the critical data. I think in 5 years from now, and I read a study recently that more than 60% of data is non-CRF data. So if you think about being able to digitally and clearly identify endpoints and set parameters and standards for the collection of data agnostic to source, it's going to put a whole new lens on database build and the automation thereof. Yeah. So I think we're there. We're getting there. We just need to leverage what we have, and I think the innovation is going to come as we expand and we realize on what we already have in place.
Yep, and I was going to say just the standardization of visit names, so across either oncology, if it's cycles or whatever, makes a huge difference and really facilitates creating that time and event schedule. Right now, I guess a lot of companies struggle with standardizing that, and it does add time. And the most complex thing is getting that grid right with what form belongs in what visit with what name. So standardization is definitely the way to go.
Thank you all. The next one is, kind of a continuation to this one. This is related to the cost and what would be the cost implications of all those tools in the DM budget. Would we be able to justify the cost? Who would like to take this?
I'll throw up a quick perspective in there. So I mentioned earlier on that there were metrics that suggest that you can avoid 2 protocol amendments in an average phase 3 study. So if you look at industry metrics, that's approximately $900,000 being able to avoid 2 amendments per study. So I think that there's significant benefits to this. The other piece I would throw in is if you don't do it, how are you going to survive and remain competitive in 5 years' time? I think there are some significant drivers for realizing the value of standards. It can't be done by just taking in the standards themselves. You've got to have the infrastructure and processes to support it as well.
Thank you, Barry.
Let's just say justifying some of these efforts through return on investment is not foreign. It's something we have to do for every single one, and I do think the opportunity is there. You also have to differentiate between some of the commoditized work, some of the work that we do that historically has been commoditized, to how it's been evolving to more robust and more significant work beyond reviewing data dumps. I think one of the questions that I saw scroll by was kind of suggesting something to the effect, and really we're talking about elevating, if specifically in the DM space, because some of these projects that we just talked about affect much more than DM. But if we talk specifically in the DM space, there is ample work to do with the veracity and velocity of data that we're getting among much more complex problems to solve than sitting in front of a screen reviewing data dumps. So minimizing and mitigating that aspect of the job really, to me, is a way to enable the team to do much more robust and, quite frankly, personally rewarding work too.
Yeah, just so I'll add on one point here. The costs are dramatically also reducing over a period as more and more sponsors are we're looking at more adoption. The models are getting better trained. The cost of running models and the compute engines which are needed, the cost of those infrastructure also is reducing. So the cost aspect of it, I feel that it'll benefit, the ROIs can be built, but there's no comparison for the time. If that is important is found in time, much ahead of how a human is doing it. It's priceless. So sometimes you got to weigh this. It's not always cost aspect of it. Sometimes the time also actually dominates the value of these kind of innovations.
I agree. If you think about what Barry and Maria had said, so if you think about a digital protocol, you'd be able to tell as a protocol author that there was an endpoint that was not available to you that you had to create, which means there were standards needs. Rather than a data manager waiting for a draft protocol to look through that and identify it, you'd have an early indicator that a discussion needed to happen around that science and formulate that standard all the way through the SDTM submission. So there's a huge advantage to starting the conversation earlier to get the standard available to meet your study go live.
Thank you all. And we have many other questions, but we only have 1 minute to go. So let's conclude this session for today, this webinar. I would like to thank you all for preparing, participating, sharing your ideas, sharing your experiences. and also to the SCDM learning team for supports in organization and moderation of this webinar. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and let's stay connected.
So thank you, Joanna, and
Thank
also
you.
panelists. Thank
Cheers.
you, and thank you for attending. And once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we will would appreciate if you could complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 48 hours with the link to view recording today's webinar. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.